The first arrow took the lead horse through the eye, and the stagecoach pitched forward like a drunkard, wheels screaming as it tore straight into the wall of fire roaring across the canyon mouth. Evelyn Redhawk, 30 years old and already tired of living, felt the iron strongbox chained to her left wrist slam against her ribs hard enough to crack bone. She tasted blood and gun smoke and knew, with the cold clarity that comes right before dying, that tonight the desert was going to collect every debt she owed. The driver was already dead, an Apache lance pinning him to the seat like a butterfly on a board. The shotgun guard fired once, twice into the dark, then folded forward with a feathered shaft blooming between his shoulder blades. The coach hit a boulder, tilted, and rolled. Evia was thrown clear. The chain snapped taut, wrenching her shoulder from its socket with a wet pop. She landed face down in hot sand, ears ringing, lungs full of burning creosote. For one heartbeat, the world was nothing but fire and screaming horses. Then boots crunched beside her head. She rolled onto her back and looked up into a face she had last seen 13 years ago, the night she ran from the reservation with a stolen army horse and a heart full of poison. Kiona Blackfeather stood over her, silhouetted against the flames. Tall, raw-boned black hair loose to his waist and tied back with a strip of blood-red calico. A Henry repeater rested easy in the crook of his arm the way another man might carry a child. The scar that ran from the corner of his left eye to the corner of his mouth caught the firelight like a fresh wound. It had been a white man's bayonet that gave it to him the day the soldiers hanged his wife for singing a mourning song. He looked first at the strongbox, then at the torn, bloody skin where the cuff had chewed her wrist to the bone. "Still wearing their iron, Evelyn?" His voice was low, rough as river stone, and it cut deeper than any blade. She spat blood and tried to sit up. A girl's got to eat. Behind him, 6 warriors sat their ponies in perfect silence, faces blackened with charcoal and hate. One of them was only a boy, maybe 15, eyes burning hotter than the brush fires. Evia's stomach lurched. She knew that face. Same cheekbones as her own. Same mouth as their mother's before the rope took it. Kiona knelt, slow and deliberate, and drew a skinning knife from his moccasin. The blade flashed orange in the firelight. He pressed the point under her chin, forcing her head back until the tendons in her neck screamed. "Listen well," he said in Chiricahua, loud enough for every warrior to hear. "This woman is mine, by blood debt older than any of you. Her life belongs to me." The boy spat on the ground. "She guided the surveyors to Cienega de los Apaches. She sold our water for white man's silver. I claim her scalp." Kiona didn't even glance at him. "You will have your war, Nahus, but not tonight." He sliced the chain from the strongbox in one clean stroke, then hauled Evia to her feet by her good arm. Pain exploded white behind her eyes, but she refused to cry out. He threw her across the front of his saddle like a sack of meal, belly down, the pommel digging into her ribs. The smell of horse sweat and sage and Kiona himself flooded her senses, dragging her back to a summer when they were 16 and the world still had mercy in it. He swung up behind her, one iron arm pinning her in place, and kicked the pony into motion. The warriors wheeled and vanished into the smoke like ghosts. Behind them, the stagecoach burned, ammunition cooking off in bright pops that lit the canyon walls the color of fresh blood. They rode hard, climbing switchbacks into the Dragoon Mountains where the air thinned and the stars pressed close enough to touch. Evia's dislocated shoulder throbbed with every hoofbeat. She could feel Kiona's heartbeat against her spine, steady and furious. The same rhythm that used to lull her to sleep under cottonwoods along the Gila, when they were children stealing kisses and promising forever. Dawn found them in a hidden box canyon ringed by red cliffs that leaned inward like conspirators. A spring trickled from the rock, feeding a single cottonwood whose leaves shivered silver in the wind. Maybe 30 wickiups huddled beneath it, smoke curling thin and blue. Women paused in grinding corn to stare. Children scattered like quail. Warriors watched with rifles across their knees. Kiona reined in and slid from the saddle, dragging Evia down after him. Her legs buckled. He caught her before she hit the ground, fingers digging into her arms hard enough to bruise. "Walk," he said. She walked. Every eye in the camp followed her. She felt the weight of their judgment like stones in her pockets. He shoved her toward a small wickiup at the edge of the clearing, the one with a door flap made from an army blanket dyed black. Inside, the air was thick with cedar smoke and the sweet rot smell of old bear grease. A single buffalo robe lay on the packed earth floor. A tin cup and a clay bowl sat beside the fire ring. No chains, no guards visible. Just the two of them. Kiona dropped the flap, shutting out the newborn sun. Darkness folded around them, broken only by the low red glow of banked coals. Evelyn's legs gave out. She sank to her knees, cradling her ruined arm. Blood dripped steadily from her wrist onto the dirt. Kiona stood over her, chest rising and falling. The scar on his face looked wet, though whether from sweat or tears she couldn't tell. "You going to kill me now?" she asked, voice hoarse. "Get it done." He crouched, bringing them eye to eye. Up close she could see new lines carved around his mouth, the kind put there by grief and sleepless nights. "I should," he said. "Nahas wants your scalp nailed to his lance. The old men want you burned slow so your screams carry to the spirits. Even the women want a piece." His fingers brushed the raw skin of her wrist, almost gentle. "But I find I am not ready to give you to them." She laughed, a cracked sound. 13 years, Kiona. 13 years since I left you bleeding in the dust outside San Carlos. You've had time to practice hating me. I never needed practice." Silence stretched, thin as rawhide left too long in the sun. He reached out and touched the brand on her collarbone, the one the army laundress burned into her when she was 10. U.S. property. His thumb traced the raised scar like he was reading Braille. "You still carry their mark," he said. "And you still carry mine," she answered, nodding at the small crescent scar on his lower lip, the one her teeth had left the night they first lay together. His breath hitched. Outside, a woman began the high, wavering cry of mourning. Someone had found the bodies in the canyon. Kiona stood abruptly, as though the sound burned him. He moved to the door, then paused. "The strong box you guarded," he said without turning. "It holds the new treaty map. Every spring, every canyon from the San Simon to the Rio Grande, signed away to the railroad. My sister's children will die of thirst because of what you carried." Evia closed her eyes. She could still smell the surveyor's tobacco on her hands from the day she led him to Cienega de los Apaches, the hidden spring no white man was ever meant to find. "I was hungry," she said. $50 buys a lot of not hungry." He turned then, and the look on his face was worse than any bullet. "Tomorrow the council decides," he said. "Your brother wants to cut your heart out and feed it to the crows. I claim blood debt to buy you one more night." His voice dropped to a whisper that sliced her open. "We're alone, Evelyn. Like we used to be when the world was smaller." He stepped closer until she could feel the heat rolling off him. "Now let's do what needs doing." She didn't know if he meant kill her, kiss her, or both. And in the red dark of that wickiup, with the smell of burning creosote still clinging to their skin and the cries of the dead rising outside, Evelyn Redhawk realized she no longer cared which it was. Either way, the desert would have its due. The sun rose the color of a fresh bruise and found Evelyn Redhawk still breathing. She woke on the buffalo robe with her wrists bound in front of her. A rawhide thong knotted tight enough to remind her she was a prisoner, but loose enough to let blood through. Her shoulder had been jerked back into its socket sometime in the night. She remembered the white-hot agony in Kiona's hands, surprisingly gentle, murmuring Apache words she hadn't heard since childhood. Then nothing. He must have drugged the water he forced between her teeth. Outside, the camp was already alive. The rhythmic thunk of an axe splitting mesquite, the low laughter of women pounding acorns, a baby's sudden wail cut short by a breast. Normal sounds. Sounds of people who had decided the world would not end today. Evie sat up slowly. Her mouth tasted of willow bark and something metallic. Sunlight leaked through the smoke hole, painting the dirt floor gold. The strongbox was gone. So was Kiona. A shadow fell across the doorway. An old woman ducked inside carrying a clay bowl of stew and a folded square of calico. Her face was a map of hard winters, eyes the flat black of obsidian. She set the bowl down, untied Evie's wrists without a word, and left. The calico turned out to be a skirt and blouse once blue, now sun faded to the color of a dove's wing. Someone had washed the blood from them. Evie ate. The stew was rabbit and wild onion, thick with hominy. It tasted like forgiveness she hadn't earned. She had just finished when the hide flap lifted again and Kiona stepped in. He had bathed. His hair was wet and braided tight, the red headband replaced with one of plain buckskin. He wore a blue cavalry jacket with the buttons torn off and a cartridge belt slung low. The Henry repeater was nowhere in sight, but the knife at his waist looked eager. He studied her the way a man studies a loaded rifle he isn't sure he wants to fire. "You kept the food down," he said. "Your cook's better than the army's." A flicker of something crossed his face, almost amusement, gone before it could settle. "Council meets at noon," he said. "They'll decide whether you burn, hang, or get traded south for rifles. Nahas speaks first. He's been sharpening his knife on a rock since dawn." Evie felt the stew turn to stone in her belly. "And you?" "I speak last." He crouched, bringing them eye level. "Tell me why you guided the surveyors to Cienega de los Apaches. Tell me true, and I'll try to buy you a clean death." She laughed, a dry rasp. "You think there's such a thing out here?" "Talk." So she did. She told him about the winter of '78, when the San Carlos agent sold the beef ration and the children ate cactus pulp until their mouths bled. She told him about the brand on her shoulder and the years scrubbing blood out of soldiers' long johns for 2 bits a week. She told him about the Pinkerton captain who found her dealing faro in Tombstone and offered $50 cash to guide a surveyor to a spring no one had mapped yet. "I was tired of being hungry," she said. "Tired of being the half-breed laundress who couldn't walk past the fort gate without some drunk private trying to lift my skirts." $50 was a train ticket to San Francisco. A new name. A room with a window that didn't smell of lye soap and other people's sins. Kiona listened without moving. When she finished, the silence was so complete she could hear her own heart. "You sold our water for a train ticket," he said at last. "I sold it because I thought I was already dead inside," she answered. "Dead people don't feel guilty." He stood so fast the air stirred. For a moment she thought he would hit her. Instead he turned and left without another word. The council gathered in the shade of the cottonwood. 20 warriors sat in a half circle, faces painted black for judgment. Nahas stood in the center, bare to the waist, his scalp knife catching the sun. When Evie was let out, wrists rebound, skirt flapping around her calves, he looked at her the way a wolf looks at a lame deer. He spoke in rapid Chiricahua, voice rising and falling like a war chant. Evie caught pieces. Traitor, poison water, children crying, white man's dog. When he finished, he drew the knife across his own forearm, letting blood drip onto the dirt as oath. Old Goshivan, the D, raised a hand for silence. His eyes were milky with cataracts but missed nothing. Kiona stepped forward. He spoke quietly, so quietly the warriors leaned in to hear. Evie caught only fragments. Blood debt older than treaties, a life promised long ago, the mountain spirits who judge deeper than men. When he finished, he drew his own knife and laid it point down in the dust between him and Nahas. "I claim her," he said in English, loud enough for Evia to hear every word. 3 days. I take her to Zilwees. If the Gons do not take her, she is mind, body, breath, and bone. If they do, her blood feeds the mountain, not this camp." A murmur rippled through the circle. Nahas started forward, face twisted, but Goshivan's staff cracked against the ground. "It is decided," the old man said. 3 days. That night the camp feasted on a mule taken from the burned stage. Evia sat apart, under guard, eating roasted ribs while children stared and whispered. The air smelled of mesquite smoke and impending storm. Long after the fires burned low, Kiona came for her. He led her to where 2 horses waited beyond the cottonwood, his black stallion and a steel dust mare with a white handprint painted on her shoulder. A rifle scabbard hung from each saddle. He cut the rawhide from her wrists and handed her the mare's reins. "Mount," he said. She swung up bareback, the horse dancing under her weight. Pain shot through her shoulder, but she clamped her teeth and said nothing. Kiona vaulted onto his stallion. "We ride south before moonset. If Nahas decides honor matters less than revenge, he'll come after us. And if the mountain spirits decide I'm guilty?" He looked at her then, and the expression on his face was older than the rocks around them. "Then I die with you," he said simply. "I gave my word." Thunder growled in the Dragoon Peaks like a warning. Heat lightning flickered, lighting the cliffs blood red for a heartbeat at a time. Evia gathered the reins. The mare quivered, eager. "One thing before we ride," she said. He raised an eyebrow. She kneed the mare forward until their legs touched, then leaned across the narrow space between horses and kissed him hard, desperate, tasting smoke and grief and 13 lost years. He froze for the length of 1 heartbeat. Then his hand came up to fist in her hair, and he kissed her back like a drowning man breaking the surface. When they pulled apart, both were breathing like they'd run 10 miles. "That," she said unsteadily, "was for the girl I was before I learned better." Kiona touched his mouth as if surprised it still worked. "Ride," he said, voice rough. They left the canyon at a lope, 2 shadows swallowed by darkness and the smell of coming rain. Behind them, the council fire burned low, painting the cottonwood trunk the color of old blood. Ahead lay Zilwee as the mountain that eats souls, and 3 days to decide whether love or vengeance would claim them first. Neither of them looked back. They rode into country that had no name on any white man's map. The first day took them south along dry washes where the sand was the color of dried blood, and the only living things were buzzards, circling high enough to look like pepper grains against the sky. Kiona rode point, never speaking unless it was to warn of loose shale or a rattlesnake sunning itself on a rock. Evia followed, reins wrapped around the saddle horn because her shoulder still screamed every time she lifted her arm. By noon the heat was a living thing, pressing down until breathing felt like swallowing hot sand. They stopped once in the shade of a lone ironwood to water the horses from Kiona's canteen and chew strips of jerky so salty it made Evia's tongue swell. He checked her wrist where the iron cuff had torn the skin. The edges were angry red. "Pus by tomorrow if we don't clean it," he said. "With what? Your spit?" He gave her a look that might have been amusement and poured the last of the canteen over the wound. The water was warm and tasted of canvas, but it stung clean. Then he tore a strip from the tail of his shirt and bound the gash tight. "Try not to die of blood poisoning before the mountain gets its chance," he said. She almost smiled. That night they camped in a narrow arroyo where lightning had split a sandstone boulder clean in half. Kiona built no fire. They ate cold pemmican and drank the last of the water. Stars crowded the sky so thick Evia felt she could reach up and scoop them like minnows. Kiona sat with his back against the rock, rifle across his knees, staring at nothing. After a long while he spoke, voice low. "When they hanged my wife, I was in the guardhouse at San Carlos, drunk on Tiswin. They dragged me out to watch so I would remember who owned the rope." He turned his head. "I remembered your face instead. The way you looked the night you left. Like you were already a ghost." Evie's throat closed. "I thought if I stayed, they'd hang me next. Or worse. Worse came anyway." Silence stretched, broken only by the wind whirring at the sandstone. She crawled across the space between them and laid her head against his good shoulder. He went rigid, then slowly let his arms settle around her. They slept like that, upright, rifles close, two people trying to share warmth that had been gone for years. The second day a storm found them. It rolled down from the Chiricahuas black as a buffalo herd, lightning stitching the sky together. The horses shied and fought the bits. Rain came sideways, hard as buckshot. Within minutes the arroyo was ankle-deep in red water. Kiona shouted something lost in the wind and pointed toward a limestone overhang 20 yards upslope. They made it just as the flash flood roared past below, carrying cactus skeletons and the bones of things long dead. Under the ledge there was barely room for 2 horses and 2 people. Rain drummed on the rock above them like 1,000 angry fists. Kiona unsaddled the horses, threw the blankets over them all. The air smelled of wet horse and ozone and something sharper fear, maybe, or want. Evie's teeth chattered. Kiona pulled her against his chest without asking, wrapping the single wool blanket around them both. His skin burned hot through the wet shirt. "We're going to die up here," she said into his neck. "Not tonight." His hand found the back of her head, fingers threading through hair stiff with dust and sweat. She felt his mouth brush her temple, then the corner of her eye, then her mouth. The kiss started slow, almost careful, like testing thin ice. Then the storm broke something in both of them. She kissed him back with 13 years of starvation. Hands tore at buttons, at laces, at anything keeping skin from skin. The blanket fell away. Rain lashed their bare shoulders as he pressed her against the rough wall. Mouth hot on her throat, her breast, the scar the army had burned into her when she was 10. When he slid inside her, it felt like coming home and going to war at the same time. Afterward they stayed joined, breathing hard, rain cooling the sweat on their backs. Thunder walked the ridges overhead like giants arguing. "I still might have to kill you," he whispered against her wet hair. "I know," she whispered back. Neither of them slept again that night. On the third day the land changed. The mountains rose around them like the ribs of some great dead beast. Pines appeared, dark and fragrant, and the air tasted of snow even though it was June. They left the horses hobbled in a meadow, where grass grew stirrup high and a spring ran cold enough to numb the fingers. Kiona shouldered a small pack jerky, a tin cup, a pouch of sacred pollen, and looked at Evie. "From here we walk," he said. "The Gans do not speak to those who ride." The trail was no trail at all, just a faint game path climbing through manzanita and bear grass. By midday the sky had turned the color of a fresh bruise again, but no rain came. Only wind, cold and knife-edged, singing through the rocks. Halfway up, Evie's legs gave out. She sat down hard on a slab of granite and couldn't make herself stand. Kiona crouched in front of her, eyes searching her face. "Leave me," she said. "Tell them I ran. Tell them whatever you need to." He didn't answer with words. He simply turned, knelt, and pulled her arms over his shoulders. Then he stood, lifting her onto his back like she weighed nothing. She tried to protest, but the words came out a sob against the back of his neck. He carried her the last 2,000 feet, boots slipping on pine needles, lungs heaving the thin air. When they reached the summit, the sun was bleeding out behind the western ridge. The peak of Zilwees was a bare dome of stone ringed by a circle of ancient cairns. In the center burned a fire no human hand had kindled, blue, white, and soundless, rising from bare rock. The wind did not touch it. Kiona set her down gently. Her legs trembled but held. He painted her face with white clay 4 directions, 4 strokes, then his own. The clay was cold and smelled of earth after rain. "Speak your truth," he said. "All of it. The spirit's here lies, and take the liar's heart." Evia stepped to the edge of the flame. Heat rolled over her face, though the fire gave no smoke. She told them everything. She told them about her mother singing as the rope went tight, about the brand and the nights she earned extra coins on her knees behind the sutler's store, about the surveyor who smelled of bay rum and paid her in crisp greenbacks to betray a spring older than tribes or treaties. She spoke until her voice cracked and the wind carried pieces of it away. When she was done, she felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped her clean. Kiona stepped forward. He drew his knife and laid it on the ground between them, then knelt bare-chested before the fire. "My truth," he said, voice carrying to the edges of the world. "I loved this woman when we were children. I love her still, though the taste is poison. If blood is required, take mine. I give it freely." He spread his arms wide, waiting. Evia's heart stopped. The mountain fire roared upward, green gold, the color of summer grass and old blood. For one impossible moment she saw shapes in the flames, mountain lions pacing, eagles circling, the faces of people long dead, her mother, Kiona's wife, children who had starved at San Carlos. Then the fire sank to embers as suddenly as it had risen. Silence fell so complete she heard snowflakes land on stone, though no snow fell. Kiona rose slowly. His eyes shone wet in the dying light. "It is finished," he said. "The debt is paid." Evia laughed once, a broken, wondering sound, and then she was in his arms, and they were both shaking so hard they had to hold each other up. Far below, thunder rolled across the desert like distant artillery. The mountain had spoken. They were still alive. They did not wait for darkness. Kiona took the Henry from his saddle scabbard, checked the load with fingers steady as a surgeon's, and handed Evia the skinning knife. The blade was shorter than her forearm, but it had tasted blood before and would again. "Nahas wants a fight on the trail," Kiona said, voice low. "We give him one he didn't plan." They left the horses hobbled bait and climbed the eastern wall of the meadow, moving from boulder to pine shadow like ghosts. The wind had shifted. It carried their scent away from the hunters below. By the time the sun touched the western ridge, they were 300 feet above the meadow, bellies to the rock, looking down on Nahas and his 2 companions. Nahas had dismounted. He stood in the center of the grass, rifle across his chest, staring up the trail they were supposed to descend. The other 2 warriors, one old, one barely shaving, sat their ponies at the meadow's edge, smoking and talking in low voices. Kiona touched Evia's arm. "The old one is Taza. He taught me to track when I was 8. He will not die easy. And the boy? Doesn't matter. He dies first." There was no mercy in Kiona's voice, only arithmetic. Evia felt the knife heavy in her hand. She had killed before once a drunken soldier who thought a half-breed. Laundress was free for the taking, but never family. Nahas was her mother's last child, born after the raid that took her away. Same blood ran in their veins, thinned by different fathers, but blood all the same. She closed her fist around the knife until the handle bit. "Let's get it done." They moved. Kiona went left, sliding down a chimney of rock so narrow his shoulders scraped. Evia went right, using a deer trail that switched back through Manzanita. The plan was simple. Kiona would take the high ground above Taza. Evia would come in low behind the boy. When the first shot cracked, Nahas would look up the trail. That was when Kiona would end it. Halfway down, Evia's foot rolled on loose gravel. A pebble clattered, loud as a gunshot in the stillness. Below, the boy's head snapped around. He said something sharp. Taza swung his pony, rifle rising. Evie didn't think. She ran. She burst from the brush 20 feet behind the boy, knife low. He saw her, eyes widening, fumbled for the pistol at his belt. She hit him like a cougar, blade sliding under the ribs and up. Hot blood poured over her wrist. The boy made a sound like a kicked dog and folded. Taza shouted a single, furious bark and fired from the hip. The bullet whined off rock inches from Evie's head. She dropped, rolled, came up inside the old warrior's guard. He clubbed at her with the rifle butt. She ducked under it, felt the wind of it stir her hair, and drove the knife into his thigh just above the knee. Tendon parted with a wet snap. Taza screamed and toppled. Nahas was already moving. He sprinted across the meadow, rifle up, looking for Kiona. Evie saw him at the same moment Kiona's Henry cracked from the ridge. The bullet took Nahas high in the shoulder, spun him half around. He didn't go down. Instead, he dropped the rifle, drew a knife longer than Evie's forearm, and charged straight up the slope toward Kiona's position, blood painting his arm black in the failing light. Evie ran after him. She caught him 30 feet up the tailless slope. He heard her, whirled, knife slashing in a vicious arc meant to open her from belly to throat. She parried with her own blade, steel ringing on steel, then kicked him hard in the knee. Something popped. Nahas staggered but didn't fall. They crashed together, rolling down the slope in a tangle of limbs and curses. Rocks tore skin. The knife was lost. Evie tasted blood his impossible to tell. Nahas got on top, hands around her throat, thumbs digging for the windpipe. His eyes were wild, full of every grief the reservation had ever given him. "You sold our water," he hissed in Apache. "You sold our mother's grave." She couldn't breathe. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. Then Kiona was there. He hit Nahas like a cannonball, shoulder driving into the boy's ribs, lifting him clear off Evie and slamming him into the dirt. The two men rolled, punching, gouging, biting. Nahas was younger, stronger, but Kiona fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. He got behind Nahas, arms snaking around the throat, legs locking around the waist. Evie found the long knife where it had fallen. She crawled forward on hands and knees, every breath fire. Nahas saw her coming. His eyes, her mother's eyes, went wide with something that might have been recognition. Evie knelt in front of him. Blood dripped from her split lip onto his chest. "I'm sorry," she said in Apache, voice raw. "For the spring. For Mother. For everything." She drove the knife into his heart. Nahas exhaled once, a soft, wondering sound, and died looking at her. Kiona held him a long moment after life left, then gently laid the body down. His hands were shaking. Taza was crawling toward his horse, dragging the ruined leg. Kiona walked over, picked up the fallen Henry, and without ceremony shot the old man through the back of the head. The report rolled across the meadow and died among the pines. Silence fell, broken only by the horses blowing and stamping. Evie sat in the grass and cried ugly, tearing sobs that felt like they came from her bones. Kiona sat beside her, covered in blood that wasn't all Nahas's, and put his arms around her until the storm passed. When she could speak again, she said, "I killed my brother." "You gave him a warrior's death," Kiona answered. "He would have wanted that." They buried the bodies under cairns of stone, working by starlight. No words were spoken over the graves. The mountain had already heard everything that needed saying. They rode south for 3 weeks, following game trails and old Apache roads that no white man would ever find. Behind them, smoke rose from the hidden canyon cavalry had come while they were on Zilwees, burning wickiups, shooting dogs, taking prisoners. Goshevan had sung his death song at dawn and walked into the soldiers' fire rather than be chained. Kiona did not speak for days. When he finally did, his voice was hoarse from disuse. "They will come for us now," he said. "All of us. Then we go where they cannot follow." They crossed into Mexico at a place where the Rio Grande was only knee-deep and the water ran red with sunset. In the Sierra Madre, deep in canyons no map had ever dared, the last free Apache waited women, children, old men who had slipped the soldier's net. When Kiona rode in leading Evie, the people came out silently and touched his stirrup as if he were a ghost returned. He was made war chief that night around a fire of cedar and grief. Years slipped by like beads on a string. Children were born with Evie's green eyes and Kiona's straight black hair. They grew up speaking Chiricahua and Spanish and the rough English Evie taught them from dog-eared dime novels. They learned to ride before they walked, to shoot a rifle by the time they were 6, to listen to the wind the way their father did. In the spring of 1890 a writer came old, half-blind, carrying a letter sealed with pink wax from a lawyer in Tucson. The railroad had gone bankrupt. The treaty was void. The land was returned to the tribes, too late for most, but not all. Kiona read the words Evie translated aloud. When she finished, he folded the paper once, twice, and fed it to the fire. "Paper promises," he said. "We have water. We have horses. We have each other." That night they walked to the spring that fed the hidden canyon. Fireflies drifted above the water like slow sparks. The children were asleep under blankets woven from dog hair and hope. Kiona took Evie in his arms the way he had the first time when they were 16 and the world was wide and merciful. "We're alone," he whispered against her mouth, the old phrase thick with memory. She smiled, the scar on her collarbone catching moonlight. "Then let's do what needs doing," she answered. And under a sky vast enough to hold all their dead, they began again, this time without debts, without chains. Without anything but the country beyond the maps and the long, fierce years they had earned with blood and fire and the stubborn refusal to die. The Apache woman and the Apache man had come home, and the desert, for once, kept its silence.